I'm Odelia, 32, and I lost both my parents in a car accident last spring at their funeral reception while I stood in my black dress with mascara-stained cheeks. My husband Marcus pulled me into my father's study and asked for a divorce. He couldn't have chosen a more devastating moment. What he didn't know was that his cruel timing would be his undoing. Within weeks, I discovered secrets that changed everything and turned the tables so completely that the man who once discarded me was on his knees begging for mercy. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever discovered that someone you loved wasn't who you thought they were, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this story ends. Marcus and I met during our first year at Columbia Law School 8 years ago. I was top of our class, focused entirely on my studies, while juggling a part-time job to help with expenses. My parents had sacrificed so much to help me attend working extra hours at their small accounting firm in Maine, and I was determined to make them proud. Marcus Whitfield came from a different world entirely. The son of a prominent New York banking family, he had the easy confidence of someone who had never worried about money. Tall, with perfect dark hair, and the kind of smile that made professors and students alike immediately warm to him. He moved through life as if it had been designed specifically for his pleasure. We were paired together for a mock trial in our second semester. I was initially annoyed, assuming he was another rich kid, coasting on family connections rather than merit. But during our preparation, I discovered he was genuinely brilliant, with a quick wit and natural charm that disarmed witnesses during cross-examination. We won the competition handily, celebrating afterward at a small Italian restaurant near campus. To my brilliant partner, Marcus had toasted, raising his glass of wine, without whom I would have been thoroughly destroyed by Thompson's team. We made a good team, I acknowledged, surprised by how much I'd enjoyed working with him. We could make an even better one, he replied, those intense blue eyes focused entirely on me, professionally and otherwise. Our relationship developed quickly after that night. We studied together, challenged each other, and soon became inseparable. My initial reservations about his privileged background faded as I discovered his surprising depth and apparent devotion. When he kissed me for the first time outside the library after a late study session, it felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. My parents were hesitant when I brought Marcus home during spring break of our second year. My father, Robert, a practical man who had built his accounting business from nothing, seemed particularly concerned. "He seems nice enough, Delia," he said, using my childhood nickname as we washed dishes after dinner. "But there's something there I can't quite put my finger on. Just be careful, sweetheart." My mother Ellen was more diplomatic. "He clearly adores you," she observed, "but there's no rush for anything serious. You have your whole career ahead of you." I dismissed their concerns as the natural protectiveness of parents who had never seen their only daughter in a serious relationship. In my eyes, Marcus was perfect, brilliant, ambitious, and seemingly devoted to me. By our graduation, Marcus had proposed, with a diamond ring that must have cost more than my parents' car. We married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended his desire for elegance with my preference for intimacy. My parents embraced him fully by then, won over by his apparent dedication to me and his charming attentiveness to them. I was wrong about him, my father admitted at our wedding reception. "He's a good man, Delia. I'm happy to welcome him to our family." After passing the bar, I accepted a position at Caldwell & Ross, a prestigious corporate law firm in Manhattan. Marcus, despite his family connections, struggled to find his footing. His grades, while good, hadn't matched mine, and his interview skills surprisingly didn't translate to job offers from top firms. "They can't see past my family name," he complained after another rejection. "They assume I'm just another trust fund kid playing at being a lawyer." I supported him emotionally and financially as he eventually opened a small private practice focusing on real estate law and minor civil cases. Our agreement was that I would handle our major expenses with my corporate salary while he built his client base. I never minded. I was making excellent money, and I believed in him completely. For the first few years of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. We moved into a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn that stretched our budget but felt like the perfect place to eventually raise children. We hosted dinner parties for colleagues, took vacations to Europe, and built what I thought was an enviable life together. My parents remained an important part of our lives, visiting from Maine every few months. My mother would bring her famous blueberry pies that Marcus claimed to adore, while my father and I would stay up late discussing books or politics. They had fully embraced Marcus as their son-in-law, often bringing him thoughtful gifts or calling just to check in on him. It was during the 6th year of our marriage that I began noticing changes in Marcus. Small things at first. He became protective of his phone, often taking calls in another room. He worked later at his office, sometimes not coming home until I was already asleep. Our joint credit card showed charges at restaurants I'd never been to, and when I mentioned them casually, he'd dismiss them as client meetings. "You're working too hard," my mother said during one of our weekly phone calls when I mentioned my concerns. "Both of you are. Why don't you plan a weekend away, reconnect a little?" I tried to follow her advice, surprising Marcus with a reservation at the same Berkshire's Inn where we'd spent our first anniversary. He seemed distracted the entire weekend, checking his phone constantly and making excuses to step away for calls. "Is everything okay with the practice?" I asked as we drove home the weekend, having done little to bridge the growing distance between us. "Just some difficult clients," he replied vaguely. "Nothing for you to worry about." My father was more direct during their last visit to our home just 2 weeks before the accident. While Marcus was out picking up dinner, he expressed his renewed concerns. "Something's different with him, Delia. I can't put my finger on it, but my instincts are telling me something's not right." "He's just stressed about work," I defended, though I'd had the same worries. "Maybe," my father conceded, "but I'm going to look into some things when we get back home, just to set my mind at ease." I never got to find out what those things were. 3 days after they returned to Maine, my parents were driving to their favorite restaurant to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed the median. They were killed instantly. The call came at midnight. I collapsed on our kitchen floor, the phone still clutched in my hand as sobs tore through my body. Marcus held me, making all the appropriate sounds of shock and grief. But even in my devastated state, I noticed something off in his reaction, a certain detachment, as if he were playing the role of supportive husband rather than truly feeling my pain. "We'll get through this together," he promised, stroking my hair as I cried. "I'm here for you." I had no idea then how cruelly false those words would prove to be. The funeral was held in my parents' small coastal hometown in Maine, where they had built their accounting practice and were beloved community fixtures. The church overflowed with people whose lives they had touched, clients who had become friends, neighbours they had helped through hard times, the kids my mother had tutored in math after school. I moved through the service in a fog of grief, barely registering the kind words, the hugs, the shared tears. Marcus stayed by my side, his arm around my shoulders, accepting condolences on my behalf when I was too overcome to speak, but there was something mechanical about his support. Several times I noticed him checking his phone, stepping away for brief calls that he claimed were work emergencies that couldn't wait. My childhood friend Laura and her husband Daniel had flown in from Chicago to support me. Laura kept shooting concerned glances at Marcus whenever he disappeared, but said nothing, focusing instead on making sure I ate, drank water, and remembered to breathe. After the service, everyone gathered at my parents' home, the same house where I'd grown up, with its blue shutters and wraparound porch overlooking the bay. The dining room table groaned under the weight of casseroles and pies brought by neighbours. People shared stories about my parents, and in those moments my grief was tempered by gratitude for having had such extraordinary people shape my life. I was speaking with my mother's oldest friend when Marcus touched my elbow. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" he asked, his voice oddly formal. "In your father's study, perhaps." I followed him down the hallway to the small room lined with my father's beloved books. The familiar smell of leather bindings and the faint trace of my father's pipe tobacco made my chest tighten with fresh grief. Marcus closed the door behind us. He didn't sit, nor did he invite me to. He stood with his back to my father's desk, his posture stiff expression unreadable. "I know this is terrible timing," he began, his voice clinical, detached. "But I've been thinking about this for a while, and I believe it's best to be direct." I waited, confused by his tone, by the strange distance in his eyes. "I want a divorce, Odelia." The words hung in the air between us. I felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. "What?" I finally managed, certain I had misheard. "I want a divorce," he repeated, checking his watch subtly. "I've been unhappy for some time now, and I think it's best for both of us to make a clean break." "You're asking me for a divorce at my parents' funeral?" My voice rose in disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" "I understand the timing is unfortunate," he said with a slight grimace that suggested irritation rather than empathy. "But, practically speaking, everyone is already gathered. It seemed efficient." "Efficient?" I echoed, shock, giving way to a boiling anger. "My parents just died, Marcus. They're barely in the ground. And you think this is an appropriate moment to end our marriage because it's efficient?" He sighed as if my reaction was unreasonable. "I knew you'd be emotional about this. That's why I thought it best to have support around you. Your friends are here, people who care about you." "And you don't care about me?" I asked, my voice breaking. 8 years together, and you can't even wait until we're home to have this conversation. "I can't handle your grief right now," he said, and for the first time, a flash of what looked like genuine emotion crossed his face. "It's too much. I need to move on." "Move on," I repeated numbly. "From me, from us, just like that." "I've already found an apartment," he continued, as if discussing a business transaction. "I'll be staying there when we return to New York. My lawyer will contact you next week about the separation agreement." I stared at this stranger wearing my husband's face, trying to reconcile the man before me with the person I thought I had married. Nothing made sense. 8 years of what I believed was a loving marriage ended in a 3-minute conversation while mourners ate casserole in the next room. "Why?" I finally asked. "At least give me that. Why now? Why like this?" He checked his phone, visibly impatient. "People change, Odelia. We want different things." "It's nobody's fault. Now I think we should rejoin the gathering separately. There's no need to make a scene." He moved toward the door, but I blocked his path. "You don't get to drop this bomb and just walk away. Tell me what changed. Tell me what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, the words automatic, empty. "Sometimes relationships just run their course." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and something in his expression shifted. "I need to take this. We'll talk more in New York." He brushed past me, leaving me standing alone in my father's study, surrounded by the books and mementos of the parents I had just buried, trying to process this additional incomprehensible loss. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in shock. Eventually, I moved to my father's chair, sinking into the worn leather that still held the impression of his body. I stared at the framed family photo on his desk, my parents and me at my law school graduation, all of us beaming with pride and hope for the future. I might have stayed there indefinitely, but the door opened and Laura peeked in. "Odelia, people are asking for you." Her concerned expression deepened when she saw my face. "What happened? What did Marcus say to you?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, a strangled sob escaped. Laura rushed to my side, calling for Daniel over her shoulder. "He wants a divorce!" I finally managed between gasping breaths. "He asked for a divorce. Here, today." Laura's face transformed with shock and then fury. "He did what?" Daniel appeared in the doorway, his usual gentle expression hardening as he took in the scene. "What's going on?" Marcus just asked Odelia for a divorce at her parents' funeral. Laura's voice vibrated with anger. Daniel muttered something under his breath that I'd never heard from the mild-mannered elementary school teacher before. Where is he now? I don't know. I said, the reality of the situation still not fully registering. He had to take a call. Laura and Daniel exchanged a look loaded with concern and something else. Suspicion, perhaps. I need to go back out there, I said, attempting to stand on shaky legs. People are waiting. People can wait, Laura said, firmly guiding me back into the chair. Take a minute. Breathe. As I struggled to regain my composure, I heard Marcus's voice from the hallway outside the study. His tone was hushed but triumphant. It's done. She doesn't suspect anything about the money. I'll be back in New York tomorrow, and we can proceed as planned. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. No, she has no idea. She's too grief-stricken to connect the dots right now. It's perfect timing, actually. Another pause. I know, baby. I can't wait either. Just a few more weeks, and we'll have everything we ever wanted. I felt the room spin around me. Laura's hand tightened on my shoulder as she too heard the conversation. That absolute bastard, she whispered. By the time we emerged from the study, Marcus had already left the reception. He sent a text an hour later. Flying back to NY tonight. We'll be in touch about arrangements. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he had done. No sign of the man I thought I had married. That night, as Laura and Daniel helped me lock up my parents' house, I felt as if I had been hollowed out, emptied of everything but pain. I had lost my parents and my husband in the span of a week, and I had no idea how I would ever find my way forward from this darkness. What I didn't realize then was that the path forward would be illuminated by a burning sense of justice, and that Marcus had made the biggest mistake of his life by underestimating just how thoroughly I would discover his betrayal. The days following the funeral passed in a blur of grief and administrative necessities. Laura and Daniel extended their stay, helping me navigate the overwhelming tasks of death certificates, obituary notices, and the initial steps of settling my parents' estate. Marcus remained in New York, sending clinical texts, asking when I would return so we could discuss the separation process. I functioned on autopilot, moving through each day in a fog of disbelief. At night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I cycled between sobbing for my parents and trying to comprehend how my marriage had disintegrated so completely without my awareness. You need to eat something, Laura urged on the 5th day, placing a bowl of soup in front of me at my parents' kitchen table. Just a few spoonfuls. I made an effort for her sake, though food tasted like nothing. I should be going through Dad's office, I said, forcing myself to focus on practical matters. He was always so organised with their finances. There must be information I need to find. Daniel and I can help, Laura offered, but only if you're ready. I need to do something, I replied. I can't just keep sitting here thinking about everything. My father's home office was meticulously organised, just as his professional one had been. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer neatly labelled Taxes, Investments, Insurance House. On his desk sat a framed photo of my mother on their 30th anniversary trip to Italy, her smile radiant against the backdrop of the Tuscan countryside. I started with the most immediate needs: insurance policies, funeral expense accounts, utility bills that would need to be transferred or cancelled. Laura and Daniel helped sort paperwork into actionable piles, working quietly and efficiently beside me. In the back of the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, behind folders of tax returns, I found a small, fireproof safe I'd never seen before. It was locked with no key in sight. Any idea what the combination might be? Daniel asked, examining the dial. I thought for a moment. Try 051585, I suggested. My birthday. The safe clicked open with the first attempt. Inside was a manila envelope with my name written on it in my father's distinctive handwriting, along with several USB drives labeled backup, clients, and a small velvet jewelry box containing my grandmother's sapphire earrings. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter dated just 1 week before the accident. "Delia," it began, using the nickname only my parents had ever used for me. "If you're reading this, something has happened to your mother and me, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I hope you have many decades before you need to open this safe, but I've learned that life doesn't always follow our preferred timeline. Inside this envelope, you'll find the contact information for our attorney, Thomas Brennan, who has our will and all necessary documents. Everything we have is yours, of course, but there's something else I need to tell you. I've been concerned about Marcus for some time now. There have been irregularities with some financial advice he gave to a few of our clients who also used him for their real estate transactions. Nothing I can prove yet, but enough to raise red flags. I've started investigating quietly. The USB labelled MW contains what I've found so far. I planned to talk to you after more thorough research, but if something has happened to us before that conversation, please look into this carefully. I may be wrong, I hope I am, but my instincts rarely are. Whatever you discover, remember that your mother and I love you unconditionally and are incredibly proud of the woman you've become. Trust yourself, Delia. You have always had better judgment than you give yourself credit for. All my love, Dad." I stared at the letter, reading it 3 times before its implications fully registered. My father had been investigating Marcus. He had suspicions serious enough to document, and now, with his sudden death and Marcus's abrupt demand for divorce, a cold clarity began to cut through the fog of grief. "Laura," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in days, "I need to check our bank accounts." Using my laptop, I logged into the joint accounts I shared with Marcus. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. Large withdrawals had been made over the past several months. 10,000 here, 15,000 there, transferred to accounts I didn't recognize. Our savings account, which had held over $200,000 earmarked for eventually buying a larger home, had been systematically drained to less than 20,000. "That son of a bitch," Laura breathed, looking over my shoulder at the transactions. "He's been stealing from you." I plugged in the USB drive labelled MW and found dozens of files my father had compiled. Client statements showing unusual transactions, records of property sales where Marcus had served as the attorney, but with discrepancies in the reported fees, notes about connections between Marcus and certain development companies that seemed to benefit unusually from his legal services. It wasn't just our personal finances. Marcus appeared to be involved in something much more troubling with his professional practice. "I need to go back to New York," I said, closing the laptop. "Right away." "We'll come with you," Daniel offered immediately. "No," I shook my head. "You've already missed too much work. I need to handle this myself, but thank you for everything." "At least let us help you pack up here," Laura insisted, "and promise you'll call the second you need anything." "I promise," I said, my mind already racing with what I needed to do next. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus's phone call at the funeral. She doesn't suspect anything about the money. He had been planning this for months, maybe longer, deliberately, methodically. And he had timed his divorce demand to coincide with my parents' death when I would be most vulnerable and distracted by grief. The next revelation came the following morning as I was going through my father's email accounts to identify any important communications that needed responses. In his sent folder, I found a message to Marcus dated 3 days before the accident. "Marcus, need to discuss important client matter involving your real estate work. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Robert." Marcus had never mentioned receiving this email, had never mentioned my father trying to contact him. Another piece clicked into place in the puzzle of betrayal. When I returned to our Brooklyn brownstone 2 days later, I found it empty of Marcus's essential belongings. His favourite suits were gone from the closet. his toiletries missing from the bathroom. He had taken his grandmother's antique desk from the second bedroom we used as a home office, along with his collection of first edition law books. What he didn't know was that I had returned with a purpose and a plan. The paralysis of grief had given way to a cold, focused determination. I was a corporate attorney who specialized in complex financial transactions. I understood paper trails, legal vulnerabilities, and how to build an airtight case. And I had just discovered that my husband had severely underestimated me. My first call was to my firm's head of forensic accounting under the guise of helping a client with potential fraud concerns. My second was to my own bank to place alerts on all remaining joint accounts. And my third was to my parents' attorney, Thomas Brennan, to discuss not only their will, but also the evidence my father had been compiling against Marcus. As I moved through our home that first night back, I discovered additional evidence of Marcus's betrayal, a hidden burner phone in his nightstand drawer that he'd apparently forgotten in his hasty departure, email notifications for an account I'd never known about, visible on our shared desktop computer, a stack of loan documents showing he had taken out a second mortgage on our home with a forged signature that barely resembled mine. But the most devastating discovery came when I checked his browser history on our rarely used home computer. He had searched for information about the construction area where my parents had their accident 2 weeks before it happened. He had known about the dangerous road conditions, the changed traffic patterns due to construction, and had never warned them when they told him about their anniversary dinner plans at a restaurant that would take them directly through that area. While I couldn't prove he had deliberately withheld the information with malicious intent, the coincidence was too stark to ignore. Had he seen an opportunity in their planned route? Had he hoped for a tragic accident that would leave me vulnerable and distracted while he executed his plan to clean out our finances? I would probably never know for certain, but the possibility that he had intentionally remained silent about a danger to my parents' lives filled me with a resolve that transcended grief. This wasn't just about money anymore, this was about justice. The final confirmation of Marcus's betrayal came when the private investigator I hired with some of my parents' life insurance money reported back with photographs of Marcus and a woman named Rebecca Harrington, the daughter of Julian Harrington, senior partner at one of New York's most prestigious law firms. The photos showed them entering a luxury apartment building, together dining at exclusive restaurants, shopping for jewelry. According to the investigator's report, their relationship had been ongoing for at least 7 months, and based on conversations overheard at a restaurant, they were planning to start a new life together once Marcus had secured a partnership at her father's firm, a position apparently promised once his divorce was finalized, a divorce timed perfectly to coincide with my inheritance of my parents' estate. A divorce he had initiated at their funeral when I was at my most vulnerable and least able to question the financial irregularities he'd created. As the full picture of Marcus's betrayal came into focus, something shifted inside me. The overwhelming pain gave way to a steely determination. I was a victim of his manipulation and cruelty, yes, but I was also a highly trained attorney with resources and knowledge he hadn't accounted for. Marcus had made a critical error in his calculations. He had dismissed me as too grief-stricken to fight back, too trusting to investigate, too broken to stand up for myself. It was time to show him just how catastrophically he had underestimated the woman he had married. In the depths of that initial shock and grief, something unexpected happened. I found clarity and purpose through the pain. The paralysis that had gripped me since my parents' accident began to recede, replaced by a laser-focused determination that surprised even me. I had spent years supporting Marcus, believing in him, defending him to others. Now I would use all my professional skills and personal strength to ensure he faced consequences for his betrayal. I reached out to my parents' oldest friend, retired Judge William Cavendish, who had known me since childhood. Over coffee in his book-lined study, I laid out everything I had discovered. "This goes beyond a simple divorce case, Odelia," he said, his expression grave as he reviewed the financial records and my father's notes. "There's potential criminal activity here with the client funds, and the forgery on the mortgage documents is clear-cut." "What would you do if you were me?" I asked, trusting his decades of legal wisdom. William considered for a long moment. "You're a corporate attorney with expertise in financial transactions. Use that knowledge. Document everything meticulously. Build your case like you would for your biggest client. But most importantly, don't show your hand too soon." His advice crystallized the approach I needed to take. This wasn't about emotional confrontation, it was about strategic justice. I needed to be methodical, patient, and thorough. "He thinks I'm still paralyzed by grief," I said. "That gives me an advantage." "Exactly," William nodded. "Let him believe you're not functioning. Meanwhile, prepare for war." I returned to work at my firm the following week, explaining to my sympathetic colleagues and supervisors that I needed the distraction from my recent losses. In reality, I needed access to the firm's resources and expertise. I set up a secure email account and dedicated cloud storage for my evidence, meticulously documenting every financial irregularity I discovered. The forensic accountant from my firm, believing he was helping with a client matter, provided invaluable assistance in tracing the money Marcus had siphoned from our accounts. The pattern was damning. Transfers to offshore accounts, investments in questionable development projects, cash withdrawals that coincided with expensive gifts for Rebecca Harrington. Meanwhile, Marcus seemed to believe his plan was proceeding perfectly. His divorce attorney, a shark-like litigator named Jeffrey Palmer, sent over a separation agreement that was breathtaking in its audacity. It proposed that I would assume all debt on our brownstone, including the fraudulent second mortgage, while Marcus would retain his law practice and most of our liquid assets as business capital. There was even a clause attempting to shield him from any claims against future earnings, specifically including inheritance or gifts received after separation. I responded through appropriate legal channels requesting additional time due to ongoing estate matters with my parents' passing, a reasonable delay that Marcus readily granted, likely believing it served his purposes by allowing him more time to hide assets. What he didn't know was that I had already engaged Sarah Townsend, one of the city's most formidable divorce attorneys recommended by Judge William. She was known for her relentless pursuit of hidden assets and her particular distaste for spouses who attempted financial deception. "This is one of the most blatant cases of marital fraud I've seen in 20 years of practice," she said, during our first meeting after reviewing my evidence. "And his timing, asking for divorce at your parents' funeral, that's going to play very poorly before any judge." Together, we crafted a comprehensive strategy. Rather than immediately filing a counter-divorce petition loaded with accusations, we prepared it meticulously while gathering more evidence. Sarah advised me to maintain minimal business-like communication with Marcus, neither revealing my discoveries nor engaging in emotional confrontations that might alert him. "Let him think he's winning," she counselled. "The overconfident make mistakes," and make mistakes he did. Believing I was too overwhelmed to check, Marcus attempted to access my inheritance by presenting himself as my representative to my parents' bank in Maine. The bank manager, who had known my family for decades, immediately contacted me about the suspicious request. Through my private investigator, I learned that Marcus had been bragging to Rebecca about the financial windfall that would fund their new life together once our divorce was finalized. He had even taken her to look at multi-million-dollar apartments, promising they would purchase one within months. And most damning of all, I discovered communications between Marcus and several of his clients showing clear evidence that he had misappropriated funds from real estate transactions, the very concern my father had begun investigating before his death. In one case, nearly $50,000 meant for property tax, escrow, had been diverted to an account Marcus controlled. As these discoveries accumulated, I worked with Sarah to prepare legal filings that would address not just our divorce, but the broader pattern of professional misconduct. We coordinated with the district attorney's office regarding the potential criminal charges, and I prepared a detailed report for the State Bar Association about his ethical violations. Through it all, I maintained a facade of distracted grief whenever I had to interact with Marcus. During the one brief meeting we had to discuss practical matters about our shared property, I allowed him to see exactly what he expected. A woman shattered by loss, barely functional, certainly not a threat. "You're making this process much easier than it could be." He had the audacity to tell me, his tone almost grateful. "I appreciate your cooperation." I merely nodded, not trusting myself to speak without revealing the cold fury that had replaced my initial pain. Let him believe I was broken. Let him think he had won. By the 6-week mark after my parents' funeral, our plan was ready to execute. In a single coordinated day of legal action, we filed a counter-divorce petition outlining Marcus's financial fraud and seeking full financial discovery, an emergency motion to freeze all our joint assets, a formal complaint to the State Bar Association regarding client fund misappropriation, a civil lawsuit regarding the forged mortgage documents. The final piece came from an unexpected source. My father's meticulous investigation had included contact information for 3 of Marcus's clients who had expressed concerns about financial irregularities. I reached out to them directly, sharing relevant portions of my findings and suggesting they might want to review their records more thoroughly. Within 48 hours, 2 of those clients had filed their own complaints against Marcus with both the Bar Association and local authorities. The trap was set, the evidence in place. All that remained was for Marcus to realize that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down around him. I didn't have to wait long. The evening after our legal filings, my phone exploded with notifications. First came the furious text messages from Marcus, evolving rapidly from confusion to rage to desperate bargaining. Then came emails from his attorney, initially aggressive, but quickly shifting to damage control as they presumably reviewed the evidence attached to our filings. Most satisfying were the voicemails from Rebecca's father, the influential Julian Harrington, first demanding an explanation for my outrageous allegations, then falling into stunned silence as he apparently reviewed the documents mid-call, and finally closing with a clipped, "I'll be addressing this matter personally with Mr. Whitfield." I learned later that Julian had immediately withdrawn the partnership offer and terminated all professional association with Marcus upon confirming the evidence of client fund misappropriation. Rebecca, realizing that the wealthy future Marcus had promised was evaporating before her eyes, ended their relationship within days. Marcus's carefully constructed new life, built on stolen money, professional fraud, and the calculated betrayal of his marriage, was unraveling at breathtaking speed. The man who had asked me for a divorce at my parents' funeral, believing he had orchestrated the perfect exit strategy, now found himself facing professional ruin, financial devastation, and potential criminal charges. And he had yet to face me directly. That confrontation was coming, I knew. Marcus was many things, but a man who accepted defeat quietly wasn't one of them. As his world collapsed around him, I prepared myself for the inevitable moment when he would appear at my door demanding explanations, making accusations, attempting to manipulate me one final time. I wasn't afraid. The woman he had married, the trusting, supportive wife who had believed in him completely, was gone, transformed by grief and betrayal into someone much stronger, much clearer about her own worth and power. When that confrontation came, I would be ready. 3 weeks after filing the legal actions against Marcus, I was reviewing case documents in our brownstone's living room when the doorbell rang. It was nearly 9 in the evening, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the security camera I'd installed, I saw Marcus standing on the porch, his appearance shocking compared to his usually immaculate self. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair uncombed. The confident posture that had once drawn me to him was replaced by a desperate slump to his shoulders. He rang the bell again, more insistently. I took a deep breath, centering myself. This moment had been inevitable, the confrontation I had been preparing for. I activated the recording app on my phone before opening the door. "Odelia," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." I stood in the doorway, neither inviting him in nor sending him away. "I think our lawyers should handle any necessary communication." "Please," he said, an unfamiliar note of desperation in his voice. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. I considered my options. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face to deny him even the satisfaction of a final conversation, but another part, the attorney trained to gather information, recognized the potential value in hearing what he had to say. 5 minutes. I agreed, stepping back to allow him entry, but remaining near the door. That's all. He walked into the living room where we had spent countless evenings together, looking around, as if seeing it for the first time. His gaze caught on the framed photo of my parents that now sat prominently on the mantel. "You've been busy," he said, a hint of his old sarcasm breaking through the desperation. "Did you come here to state the obvious, or do you have something specific to say?" I kept it, my voice neutral, detached. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded, sudden anger flaring. "You're destroying everything I've built. The complaint to the Bar Association, the calls to my clients, was that really necessary?" I stared at him, momentarily speechless at his audacity. "You stole from me, Marcus. You stole from your clients. You forged my signature on loan documents. You had an affair while systematically draining our accounts, and you chose my parents' funeral to ask for a divorce. What exactly did you expect me to do when I discovered all of that?" "I expected you to be reasonable," he snapped. "Divorces happen. People move on. There was no need to turn this into a crusade." "Reasonable," I repeated the word, tasting bitter. "Like you were reasonable when you decided to steal my inheritance, when you decided to start a new life with Rebecca using money you took from me and your clients." He paled slightly. "How did you know about Rebecca, about the apartment shopping, about all of it?" I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "I'm a corporate attorney, Marcus. Investigating financial transactions is literally my job." He ran a hand through his dishevelled hair, visibly recalculating. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to the charming persuasiveness that had once seemed so sincere. "Odelia, listen, I know I handled things badly. The timing of the divorce request was insensitive, and yes, there were some financial indiscretions. But this scorched earth approach helps no one. We could settle this between us, come to a reasonable arrangement that doesn't involve destroying my career." "The way you were planning to destroy my financial future?" I asked quietly. "The way you tried to take advantage of my grief, to hide what you'd done?" "I made mistakes," he conceded, taking a step toward me with hands spread in apparent contrition. "Serious ones, I admit that. But what you're doing now is pure vengeance. This isn't you, Odelia. You're not vindictive." "You're right," I agreed, maintaining my distance. "I'm not vindictive. I'm just ensuring that actions have appropriate consequences." He changed tactics again, his expression hardening. "Rebecca's father is threatening to file complaints against me. Did you know that my practice is collapsing? Clients are leaving. The bank is calling in loans I can't possibly repay right now." "All consequences of your own actions," I observed. "Damn it, Odelia." He exploded, the facade of contrition vanishing entirely. "You've made your point. Call off the dogs. Tell the Bar Association you were mistaken. We can work out the divorce settlement privately." "No." The simple refusal seemed to stun him. In all our years together, I had rarely denied him anything he truly wanted. I had been the compromiser, the peacemaker, the supportive wife who put his needs first. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice low. "Money. I can get money. Once this blows over, I want justice, I interrupted. For myself, for my parents whose investigation you were apparently aware of, for your clients who trusted you. A flash of something dark crossed his face at the mention of my parents. What are you talking about? What investigation? My father was looking into financial irregularities involving your work with some of their clients, I said, watching him carefully. He emailed you about it 3 days before the accident. An accident that happened on a route with dangerous construction that you knew about but never mentioned to them. Marcus went completely still. You think I had something to do with their accident? His incredulity seemed genuine, but after discovering the depths of his deception, I couldn't trust my ability to read him anymore. I think it's a remarkable coincidence that you knew about dangerous road conditions on their planned route and never warned them, and that their deaths happened to align perfectly with your plan to divorce me and take my inheritance. That's insane, he whispered, genuine fear now visible in his eyes. I would never. I didn't. Maybe you didn't plan it, I acknowledged. But when the opportunity presented itself, you certainly didn't hesitate to take advantage of it. He sank onto the couch, the remaining colour draining from his face. Odelia, you have to believe me. I never wished harm on your parents. I may have done terrible things, but I'm not a murderer, not even by omission. For the first time since he arrived, I felt a flicker of uncertainty. The horror in his expression seemed authentic. But then again, everything about him had seemed authentic for 8 years, and it had all been a carefully constructed performance. Your 5 minutes are up, I said, moving toward the door. I think you should leave. He didn't move from the couch, staring at his hands. I'll lose everything, he said quietly. My practice, my reputation, possibly my freedom if the DA decides to pursue criminal charges. Yes, I agreed. You probably will. Finally, he looked up at me, and I saw something I had never witnessed in all our years together. Marcus Whitfield, completely broken, stripped of pretense and calculation. Please, Odelia, he whispered, sliding from the couch to his knees. I'm begging you, call off the bar investigation. We can divorce, you can keep everything, I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't destroy my entire life. The image was startling, my once proud husband on his knees, literally begging for mercy. For a moment, I felt a twist of something like pity. Then I remembered how he had looked at me in my father's study, his cold eyes assessing my grief as he calculated the optimal moment to discard me. I pulled out my phone and played the recording I had made that day, his voice saying callously, I want a divorce, followed by his explanation that the timing was efficient, since everyone was already gathered for the funeral. He flinched at the sound, covering his face with his hands. You showed me exactly who you are that day, I said, my voice steady. Now the rest of the world will know too. I'll lose my law license, he said, his voice muffled through his hands. Everything I've worked for, gone. Everything you've stolen for, I corrected. Everything you've lied for. And yes, it will be gone. That's what happens when you break the law, Marcus. When you betray the people who trusted you. He remained on his knees, shoulders shaking as I walked to the door and opened it. I think we're done here. For a moment, I thought he might refuse to leave, might continue pleading his case. Instead, he slowly rose to his feet, dignity apparently reassembled through some final act of will. You've changed, he said, pausing at the doorway. Yes, I agreed. I have. I never thought you could be this ruthless, and I never thought you could be this criminal, I replied. I guess we both misjudged each other. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had drained me, but it had also provided a strange kind of closure. The man I had seen tonight, desperate, pleading, broken, was finally showing his true self, stripped of the charm and confidence that had masked his true nature for so long. I pulled out my phone and texted Laura, Marcus just left, it's really over. Her response came immediately. You okay? I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? My parents were gone. My marriage had been revealed as a fraud. The future I had planned for so many years had vanished, and yet through all of that loss, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and had found the courage to stand up for myself, to seek justice rather than curl into victimhood. I will be, I texted back. For the first time in a long time, I think I really will be. In the months that followed my confrontation with Marcus, the legal processes I had set in motion continued their inexorable progress. The State Bar Association conducted a thorough investigation into his handling of client funds, eventually resulting in his disbarment. The civil case regarding the forged mortgage documents was settled in my favour, removing the fraudulent lien against our home. The district attorney pursued criminal charges for the misappropriation of client funds, resulting in a plea deal that included restitution community service and a suspended sentence. Marcus's careful house of cards had collapsed completely. His once promising career was over. His relationship with Rebecca had ended the moment her father discovered the extent of the financial improprieties. The life he had planned for himself, built on deception, theft, and betrayal, had vanished, replaced by a reality of disgrace and consequences. For my part, I focused on rebuilding. The initial shock and grief had given way to a more measured process of healing and reclaiming my life. I sold the Brooklyn brownstone that held too many painful memories, using the proceeds to purchase a smaller but brighter apartment in a different neighbourhood. I immersed myself in settling my parents' estate, ensuring their clients were transferred to reputable accountants, and finding meaningful ways to honour their memory. With the guidance of my therapist, a gentle, insightful woman named Dr. Chen, who specialised in grief and trauma, I began to process the multiple losses I had experienced. The grief for my parents remained profound, a deep well of sadness that I knew would never completely disappear. But the pain of Marcus's betrayal gradually transformed into something different, a hard-won wisdom about trust, a clearer understanding of my own strength, and eventually a sense of gratitude for the truth, however painful it had been. 6 months after that final confrontation with Marcus, I established the Forrester Memorial Scholarship at my old law school, using a portion of my parents' estate to fund educational opportunities for students interested in financial ethics and accountability. The first recipient was a brilliant young woman who had grown up in the foster care system and worked her way through undergraduate studies while supporting 2 younger siblings. "Your parents would be incredibly proud," Laura told me at the small ceremony announcing the scholarship. She and Daniel had remained steadfast supports throughout the entire ordeal, checking in regularly and visiting whenever possible. "I hope so," I replied. Watching the recipients shake hands with the dean, they always believed education was the path to transformation. "Speaking of transformation," Laura said, linking her arm through mine as we left the reception, "you look different these days. More, I don't know, present-centered." I considered her observation. I feel different, stronger maybe, more certain of who I am without needing anyone else's validation. In many ways, it was the most unexpected outcome of the entire painful journey. The woman who had emerged from the crucible of grief and betrayal was not the same person who had stood devastated in her father's study on the day of the funeral. That woman had defined herself largely through her relationships, daughter, wife, supporter of her husband's ambitions. The person I had become was more self-contained, more confident in my own judgment, more aware of both my vulnerabilities and my capacity for resilience. My professional life reflected this transformation as well. I had been offered a partnership at my firm, partly in recognition of my handling of several complex cases during the same period I was dealing with my personal crisis. But rather than accepting immediately, I had taken time to consider whether corporate law still aligned with my evolving sense of purpose. After much reflection, I accepted the partnership, but with a proposal to develop a new practice area focused on financial fraud protection and recovery, helping individuals and small businesses who had been victims of white-collar crime. The firm's management, impressed by the clarity of my vision and the potential for both impact and profitability, agreed to support the initiative. On the anniversary of my parents' death, I took a week off work and travelled to Maine, staying in a small cottage near the coastal town where I had grown up. I spent mornings walking along the rocky shoreline, afternoons volunteering at the community centre my mother had helped establish, and evenings going through boxes of family photographs and mementos. In one of these boxes I discovered a manuscript, my father's attempt at a mystery novel that he had been working on quietly for years but had never completed. Reading his words, experiencing his voice on the page brought both tears and laughter. With the encouragement of a local publisher who had known my father, I edited and completed the manuscript, seeing it published as a regional interest book with all proceeds going to the community centre. As for Marcus, our paths crossed only once more. After that night, he had knelt begging on my living room floor. I was leaving a restaurant in Midtown when I saw him on the opposite side of the street. Thinner, less well-dressed, his confident stride replaced by a wary shuffle. He noticed me at the same moment, our eyes meeting briefly across the distance. For a second, I felt the echo of old pain, the ghost of what I had once believed we shared. Then he looked away quickly and hurried in the opposite direction, shoulders hunched, as if against a cold wind. I continued to my office, the encounter leaving me with an unexpected sense of closure, rather than reopening old wounds. I learned through mutual acquaintances that he had eventually left New York, moving to a small town in Nevada, where a cousin had offered him work in a real estate office, not as an attorney, of course, but as an administrative assistant. There was a certain symmetry to it. The man who had once dismissed my support while building his practice, now dependent on family charity for a fresh start. I found I could think of him now, without anger, viewing his deceptions and betrayal as reflections of his own character flaws, rather than any failure on my part. The woman who had loved and trusted him completely was gone, transformed by pain into someone wiser, more discerning, and ultimately more whole. On a bright spring morning, 2 years after my parents' deaths, I received an unexpected call from Judge William Cavendish, my parents' old friend who had helped guide me through the darkest days of the crisis. "Odelia," he said, his voice warm with affection, "I'm calling with a proposition. The district attorney's office is creating a specialized unit focused on financial crimes against vulnerable populations, elderly victims, recent immigrants, people facing financial hardship. They're looking for someone with your unique combination of corporate experience and personal insight to head it up. Would you be interested in having a conversation about it?" The offer took me by surprise, representing a potential shift from private practice to public service. Yet, as William outlined the vision for the new unit, I felt a sense of alignment with the direction my life had been taking since emerging from the darkness of betrayal and loss. "I'd definitely like to learn more," I told him already, mentally calculating the financial implications, the changes in lifestyle, the potential for impact. "Excellent," he replied. "I told them you might be interested. One more thing, they'd want you to teach occasionally at the law school, sharing your expertise with the next generation." The idea of teaching, of transforming my painful experiences into knowledge that might help others avoid similar situations or better navigate them if they occurred, resonated deeply. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink. On the small table beside me sat a framed photograph of my parents on their 30th wedding anniversary, their faces alight with joy and love. Next to it was the published copy of my father's completed novel, its dedication page reading simply, "For Robert and Ellen, who taught me that stories can heal." My phone chimed with a text message from Laura. "Dinner tomorrow. Daniel's parents are in town and dying to see you." I smiled, typing back my acceptance. These small connections, friendships maintained and deepened through crisis, new relationships formed on foundations of mutual respect, and genuine caring had become the anchors of my reconstructed life. 2 years ago, I had stood frozen in shock as my husband asked for a divorce at my parents' funeral, believing that moment represented the complete destruction of my life as I knew it. In many ways, it had been exactly that, an ending so complete and devastating that nothing would ever be the same. What I couldn't have imagined then was that from those ashes of loss and betrayal would emerge not just survival, but transformation. The woman who had once defined herself primarily through her relationships to others, daughter, wife, supporter, had discovered her own strength, her own voice, her own path forward. The pain hadn't disappeared. Grief for my parents remained a permanent companion, and the scars of betrayal would always be part of my story. But they no longer defined me. Instead, they had become the foundation upon which I had built something new, a life of purpose, integrity, and cautious joy. In the end, Marcus's cruelty at my moment of greatest vulnerability hadn't destroyed me as he might have expected. Instead, it had catalyzed a journey toward becoming someone stronger than I had ever imagined I could be, someone who I liked to think would make my parents truly proud. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately made you stronger? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if my journey from heartbreak to healing resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that even the most devastating losses can eventually lead to new beginnings. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes our greatest strength emerges from our moments of greatest vulnerability.